Welcome to another episode of the Bible Explained. This is the podcast formatted video series where I discuss the Bible from start to finish and put key notations on wording, phrasing, sentencing, and sentence structure. We don't do cross-referencing here. We're just going from start to finish, each chapter taking a look. And occasionally we'll look at the previous chapter or the next chapter and link them together. But it's mostly a start to finish series. So if you've never read the Bible or you were looking for a deeper understanding, I try to use my master's degree that I acquired at a college to use it for something other than collecting dust on the wall. So that's what we do here, and if you're new here, I invite you to subscribe and continue watching each week. Usually I put out a video every week, and I appreciate your continued support and questions down below. Remember, we start off all of our studies with an invitation to accept Christ. No one can live sin-free, so I strongly encourage you to accept Christ to represent you Judgment Day. He died for our sins, and he can die for yours as well. So let's begin. We're going to talk about Genesis 15. In the previous chapter, we were discussing how Abraham ended up saving Lot, and that was because there was this massive battle, and there were a lot of issues. And basically, the summary of it, the takeaway, is that Abram was able to win because he had God's favor. He was praying to God, and these other kings, these other people were not. And so that was causing quite a few issues in that area. So we're going to begin here, and we're looking at chapter 15 of Genesis. After this, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Quote, "Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward." So, this is the first verse we're taking a look at right now. And it begins with a quotation from God. A vision. Vision could be interpreted as a dream, but the Bible does make separate statements about that, saying if somebody had a dream, it would note that it was indeed a dream. So it's not necessarily trying to portray that an individual was dreaming here. I'm just making notice that there is the potential that Abram could be dreaming here. Again, depending on your version of the Bible, it could say something just slightly different. I'm reading out of the NIV right now. You could be using the New King James Version or King James Version or whatever, but those are the ones that I usually bounce between back and forth to get a good understanding of the interpretation of the Bible. So there you go. I am your shield. I am your very great reward. Basically, the Lord offering Abram a good reward for being a faithful servant. Verse 2, "But Abram said, Sovereign Lord, what can you give me, since I remain childless, and the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus?" So Abram is prompting God, questioning, asking if he doesn't have a kid, then what is he going to get anyways? Because everything that he's going to offer, it's going to be given to somebody else. So it really doesn't matter. And Abram's kind of been getting previews of this covenant that God has been establishing with him, but he has no son, so, no heir. And Abram said, quote, "You have given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir." And this is true. Again, we talk about slavery in the Bible, and there was horrendous slavery, there was horrendous kidnappings and forced labor and forced slavery in those days. But there was also something that was somewhat known of servitude, and when you had a servant within your home, they were considered part of your family as well, which is a very important distinction that needs to be made, because here you see Abram's literally saying it, that this servant's going to inherit everything I have because I just don't have any other family to give the stuff to. Verse 4, "Then the word of the Lord came to him," quote, "This man will not be your heir, but a son who is your own flesh and blood will be your heir." Verse 5, "He took him outside and said, Look upon the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them." Quote, "Then he said to him, So shall your offspring be." Now, I appreciate that he takes Abram and tells him, go outside, look to the stars. if you can count them. Now this is kind of silly. This is actually, it's like really silly. I don't know how many stars were out at that point in time. We have lights and everything, and it's very difficult to see the sky depending on where you live. But if you go to the country, you go to the middle of nowhere and you look up to the sky, you can see lots of stars. Now, if you took the time to count them all, you probably could count them all. So this is more of a metaphorical statement. You might be able to count all these, but you won't be able to count the ones that you won't be able to see. Maybe that is too deep of an interpretation. Perhaps he was just making the illusion that you won't be able to count all of these stars, and that's how many people are going to be from your lineage, which is exactly what ended up happening. But if you look at the world now, we have 11, 12 billion people on the planet, and good Lord, if we are to believe we came from Noah, that's around 8 people. That's 8 people to 11 billion. It's quite a lot of people within the last, relatively speaking, 12,000 years. So, Abram believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. Verse 7, he also said to him, quote, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans, to give you this land to take possession of it. Verse 8, but Abram said, Sovereign Lord, how can I know that I will gain possession of it? Verse 9, so the Lord told him, bring me a heifer, a goat, and a ram, each 3 years old, along with a dove and a young pigeon. So here we go. We have another instance in the Bible of an individual questioning, challenging someone, something that is speaking to them. In this case, it happens to be the Lord. A lot of people don't particularly like when we bring up instances of people questioning or challenging the Lord. A lot of people view it as some type of disrespect, which in this case, I personally don't believe it's any type of disrespect. I believe it is a genuine question. How am I going to actually inherit this land? What's the promise? How will I know that? Even if you are God, it's a different time, it's a different world. It's not like there's all kinds of evidence to prove and show that God's been around and God's going to deliver. Abram just knows that this Lord has offered him a covenant and he has accepted it, but he has not seen a son yet. So it is very important that he gets some type of proof, some type of understanding and knowledge about this. You have to put yourself in his shoes. So here we go. Verse 10, Abram brought all of these to him, cut them into, arranged in halves opposite of each other. The birds, however, he did not cut in half. Verse 11, then the birds of prey came down on the carcasses, but Abram drove them away. Verse 12, as the sun was setting, Abram fell into a deep sleep, and a thick and dreadful darkness came over him. Verse 13, then the Lord said to him, quote, know for certain that for 400 years your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and that they will be enslaved and mistreated there. Verse 14, but I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, and afterward they will come out with great possessions. Verse 15, you, however, will go to your ancestors in peace, and be buried at a good old age. Verse 16, in the 4th generation your descendants will come back here, for the sin of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure. So this is basically God giving him a vision. People have free will. There's no question that these things could have changed, but unfortunately they didn't. This is God fulfilling his promise and letting Abram know what he's actually going to get. This is him coming down and telling him, this is why, this is how, this is what's going to happen. Verse 17, when the sun had set, the darkness had fallen. A smoking firepot and a blazing torch appeared and passed between the pieces. Verse 18, on that day the Lord made a covenant with Abram and said, to your descendants I give this land, from the Wadi of Egypt to the great river of the Euphrates. Verse 19, the land of the Canaanites, Kenizzites, Cadmonites. Verse 20, Hittites, Perizzites, Rephites. Verse 21, Amorites, Canaanites, Girgashites, and Jebusites. So, there we go. Some importance here. We're getting a covenant established. It's very, very important that we read this covenant, understand this covenant, and know this covenant. Some people might be a little bit confused. Why did Abram be told all of this? Why was Abram promised all of this? Why wasn't someone else? I don't particularly have the answers for you right at this point in time, other than at this point in time, the good Lord had decided that Abram would be his champion. Of course, God can see visions of the future, and of course, Abram could have rejected the Lord's deal, and at that point in time, things would have changed in the future, but, long story short, they had not. Ladies and gentlemen, I wanted to thank you so much for joining me yet again. In today's Bible study, we learned about Abram's covenant and how it came to be, how Abram was told about his future, and what is going to happen in the future, which will be reinforced in the future of the Bible itself. So I strongly suggest that you return here, and we're going to be going over the next chapter, which will be Hagar and Ishmael, which is an important chapter to cover. So I'll see you back here next time.